be a nice and organic conversation, but I was honored to be asked by Faran Thomason. Okay, and Faran Thomason is part of the video game industry. He's been a producer for many video games, starting with the Lynx, Road Riot. Okay, is one of the games. Lemmings, right?
Yep.
Jaguar. So he also was involved with Jaguar. Bubsy.
Bubsy is probably the one that I've most been known for, but also worked on like NBA Jam.
He's on fire.
Yeah, exactly. So that was pretty cool to work on, and some of the other ones that never came out to market, like the Red Hull Hockey or the Charles Barkley basketball. The most infamous one with probably the best frame rate in the world, I think the Supercross 3D.
Yeah, awesome. Let's give it a hand for him. I think the big thing today is talking about things that maybe Atari enthusiasts or collectors don't know about, and it's really important that he is able to share his stories and share his insight to the industry, as it's important that people connected to the industry get their word out. And I'm going to be recording this and putting this on my channel so that he can share his story, and we'll do a Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and the floor's all yours.
Okay, cool. I will take it from the top. From back in the day, as I was explaining to him, I kind of first got into computers. My dad had one of the first modem companies, so he made Hayes compatible modems way back in the 80s. So that meant I had access to like everything. As I was telling him before, we had Osborne's, K-Pros, M-size pets, Apples, and all that. However, I was actually kind of more interested in like getting into the film industry. So I thought that was gonna be my path when I was a kid growing up. So when I went to school, I went to NYU. However, anybody that knows NYU knows that it's like horrifically expensive. There's no way that neither me nor my parents could afford that. And so I went to Michigan State. And Michigan State had a pretty good, I guess, film program as well. The person that made Top Gun, Jim Cash, was one of my teachers. So he was one of the most prolific screenwriters in the 80s. So he taught classes there. Sam Raimi stole our film equipment. So from an adjacent film, from a film perspective, we got a lot of hands-on. But the most unique thing about Michigan State at the time is that there was something called the Comtech Lab. So the Comtech Lab had Amigas, Macintoshes, all kinds of, as well as I think we even had like some kind of like Linux. I don't think it was before SGI, but it was like a wavefront machine. So we had access to the ability to like make actual 3D graphics, super rudimentary 3D graphics programs. And so it was great to kind of get a start on that. But even though there, I still thought I was gonna get into film. Then once I went back home to California, saw the ad, the mythical ad, get paid to play video games. So my first interview was at Electronic Arts. What is your ad? I know jack about football, so that wasn't gonna happen. So then maybe a few weeks later, I saw like all these ads back in the day, you saw them for every video game company. Sega, like most of my friends actually were testers at Sega, and that's how they came up through the industry. I, however, saw the ad for Atari. And so I got the job at Atari, and the first day was playing the Lynx. And I think during that era, they were winding down the Lynx and building up the Atari Jaguar. So probably the first few weeks or months there, it was just testing the last batch of Lynx games like the Road Riot, the Malibu Bikini Volleyball, which did come out, Jimmy Connor's Tennis, which did come out, Lemmings, which came out, but things like Road Riot didn't make it out the door partially just because of like the brutal connection errors that you get. Imagine like you'd be racing. So we'd have cubicles and we'd run the Lynx cables across the different cubicles.
Nice.
So imagine you're in a race and like everybody jumps up and cheers that they won the race.
Oh no.
And so it was just always getting out of sync, and I don't think they were ever able to fix it in time enough to where any of the distributors or buyers gave a rip. So that one just kind of ended up in the dustbin of time. Unfortunately, we had a few other ones that didn't make it. So I can bring something up here. Alien versus Predator.
Oh, yeah.
Huge hit on the Jaguar. They did actually have a Lynx version.
How far along was that?
So I think, again, that was another case of where the resources didn't. So the story is, as I recall, the ability to play as the Alien, the Predator, and the Marine started in the Lynx version. And then, then they argued with 20th Century Fox to be able to implement that into the Jaguar version. And so once I think that caught a little bit of momentum, the Lynx version just kind of fell to the wayside. It just ran out of money, it ran out of time, because obviously the Lynx was on its way out the door. And there was a few other notable ones like Hot Dog and Fat Bobby, which you'll see floating around on the telegame circuit, or whatever you want to call it.
Hot Dog was unofficially released, I know that, and Fat Bobby was released by Telegames.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty sure. Yeah.
So yeah, Lynx, like I said, Lynx was a great little machine. I don't know if anybody's actually seen one in person.
That's a Lynx 1, by the way.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, and so then there's also the Lynx 2, which is kind of like the shorter, chubbier version, and cost reduced. And definitely when making software, or making hardware, one of the things that manufacturers try to do is just cost reduce it over time. So cut out features, like reduce the footprint, reduce hopefully like the draw and the strain on the batteries and things like that. But in the case of the Lynx, I think it was just like too late.
Yeah, I mean, Game Boy definitely was the elephant in the room that was squashing things, and it's tough because such a Lynx was so capable of so many unique features that no other handheld did.
Right, I think so. There's also like a Western versus Eastern design philosophy, especially. So if you look at like the Amigas, the STs, and the Lynxes, they're all maybe a little bit over-designed. And the nice thing about what Nintendo did with the Game Boy series was that they used the most dated, off-the-shelf materials and tried to squeeze as much life as that as possible, versus the American aesthetic of kind of like the bigger, best, better, faster. And that of course came with the price. I think Game Gear tried to like straddle it in the middle, but obviously, you know, the Game Boy was the winner in the portable handheld race at that particular time. Anybody have any specific?
Yeah, the Lynx had such, scaling, rotation, color, just, everything over the Game Boy, and
8 batteries.
8 batteries. Yeah, battery is a big issue.
And yeah, I just remember going on, trips for, just to go see the developers in the UK. And honestly, I would just take my Game Boy over taking the Lynx, just because, like, the Game Boy is going to have a lot better chance of making it on a transatlantic flight than the Lynx. However,
You mean you just didn't use your cart thing?
Oh, the cart.
yeah, I was going to run it to the cockpit, like run a long cable. Don't
what
mind
I
me,
did.
I'm just trying to power my Lynx. However, I think in the first CES that was in Vegas, they let pretty much all of the production department at Atari go to CES. And so on that flight, everybody had their Lynx, and we kind of like octopus spiderweb a bunch of Lynx cables throughout the cabin so that everybody could play Slime World.
yeah.
Nice. 8 people playing Slime World.
Yeah,
That sounds
Slime
fun.
World.
Todd's Adventures in Slime World.
Yeah, and I think, and again, there's kind of like a multiplayer game that was probably a little bit ahead of its time, and Atari just, like, they thought it was a cool game, but was probably difficult to communicate that message, plus obviously communicate the fact that you needed 8 Lynxes, which is probably like the price of a car at the time. So that kind of did make it a little bit of a tough sell.
What other games use that feature other than, I know Warbirds was, how many could do Warbirds?
Not sure.
Anybody?
Generally, I think people tried 4 players. Like, there's obviously sports games that could support it, and honestly,
games.
when it was working, it was great. Malibu Bikini, volleyball, and Jimmy Connors tennis, I think they all worked out pretty well. However, for whatever reason, the developers on Road Ride really couldn't get it together. And it was a fun game because it had all of the scaling and the rotation. It was a pretty darn good conversion, but they could not get it together.
Did Off-Road use it?
I think Off-Road might have been before my time.
I remember the first time I punched him in California games on the half pipe.
Yeah.
So nice. So satisfying.
And
Just like,
obviously, the heritage of the Lynx is from Epic, so California games became, obviously a natural companion to the Lynx.
hacky sack was weird though.
Any game like that's always gonna be a little bit to execute on.
I was inspired by the bathroom commercial.
Yes.
Right.
Who remembers that?
I
You
think
know
I
who
have-
that
Oh,
is,
you got
right?
it? Okay, sorry.
I think I have like a picture.
That's
I think
Tobey Maguire.
Tobey Maguire.
That's Spider-Man.
As weird as the bathroom commercial was, when I was putting this together, the Japanese Lynx ads are pretty interesting as well. Like, they make absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
But that's what I guess makes them cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
And
go for a drive.
like, people I know at Atari didn't even know that there is a Japanese distribution for Lynx. They're like, what is
Yeah.
this? Like, the people that handle the distribution, like,
Oh my
like,
God.
so I think like there was a lot of the Trammell brothers, I think sometimes, or their associates would get like pet projects that were not quite like Black Ops projects, but like from the top, Jack or Sam Trammell would be like, oh yeah, we need to be in Japan. And they'd call their like homie or whomever that could hook up some Japanese thing, but it would always kind of be off to the side. I think that's how a lot of those things ran. And it was for a small quantity, but just to keep those connections flowing back and forth.
Any Lynx stories of people that owned it? Anybody own a Lynx? Okay.
I've been
No.
trying to get a complete collection of it. I, loved it as a kid growing up, working on it. I'm 2 games short at this point, and I find it interesting coming to the cons. The Lynx just doesn't exist. I mean, I found more Sega Pico games than Lynx titles here.
My advice to you is East Coast. For whatever reason, you might know more information about distribution, but it seems like East Coast and some West Coast area, I find more Lynx, but not in Arizona.
I also think there's a novelty to the Pico. Like, when you see the Pico, you're like, what the heck is this? Like, why
Yeah.
does this exist? And I think even other than Pokemon, I think handheld games, even the Castlevania games, I think a lot of the handheld games tend to get a short shrift for whatever reason, no matter how good they are. And so the Lynx being the most obscure, I think tends to probably have the least amount of popularity, unfortunately. Like, I mean, so after Atari, I worked at Segasoft and then worked on a Nintendo 64 game with Tomy, a Japanese toy company that kind of never made it to market. But then I went to Nintendo and did a lot of the Western produced, non-Pokemon, non-Mario Game Boy Color games. And even internally, I would say, somewhat, even at Nintendo, these games were still like perceived as not being the top tier things, no matter how good they were. And many times they were just like, Nintendo would have a long established relationship with the developer. They would come in and pitch, and if Miyamoto liked it, it would get the green light, and then it would get thrown into my lap. And it's like, oh yeah, you take care of it. But like, not like Miyamoto or anybody really gave a rip about it. It was just like, this is just filler for the shelves in between Pokemon games and things like that.
Mario.
And because, everybody still needed stuff, product on the shelf, and Pokemon or Mario game is not gonna come out every week. We still needed some other things to, keep people occupied. So, yeah, so it did Warlock, Bionic Commando, Crystallis.
Ooh, great games.
And then a whole slew of Disney games, like Little Mermaid 2 Pinball, Alice in Wonderland. So they were all good games, but are there people's biggest Nintendo memories of them? Maybe not.
Crystallis is probably the ones that you said, that's a really good version.
Oh yeah, I think we did pretty good. I mean, if you go on the internet, a little bit of controversy about it because of Crystallis purists, but of course that's gonna happen anytime you have some kind of conversion. But yeah, I think, and that was with NST. So, I don't know if anybody's heard of DigiPen. So DigiPen is like a school to learn how to play video games. So the president of DigiPen, we're pretty good friends with the folks of the upper management at Nintendo of America and Nintendo of Japan. So they were able to kind of start a program where after you developed, you could actually start working on real games. So the 2 games that I worked on with those folks were Crystallis and Bionic Commando. So they were able to get top tier licenses. So I think we got Wave Race, Bionic Commando, Nintendo, Puzzle League, I believe, was done over there as well. And probably 1 or 2 others that my brain is forgetting at the moment. But yeah, they did really good work. The person that did the artwork for the Bionic Commando box, I think he went on to become a pretty big Marvel artist. So it was a pretty good training ground, and I think it was a great opportunity for those kids to jump on working on a professional game that got actual distribution right out of the gate. Another game I worked on, another cult game that I worked on at Nintendo, you could call it, was Pocket Soccer. So not being a soccer fan, but this was another game where the developer had like a long-standing relationship with Nintendo. And they're like, yeah, let's make a soccer game that's kind of like Pokemon. So you could do the multiplayer, you could, it was like a NBA Jam, like fast-paced soccer game, but you could like trade players, you could play multiplayer. So again, it had a lot of features, but even in the UK, they passed on it. So I think we only like shipped it to maybe like Brazil or something like that, you know? Like or maybe it was that we localized it for Latin America and Brazil, and they didn't take it, and we only shipped it to the UK. So like, you have a sales force, they go out there and they're like, oh yeah, they're gonna buy it. And we put all the effort into making it like they're like, nah, they don't want to do it. So those are some of like the unfortunate things that can happen. Any questions? Nintendo, Atari?
I have a question. So, what of all your journey through during this time? And so the Game Boy Color came out what, in late '90s,
Like 98, 99.
and so what is the time period of this development when you're talking like Pocket Soccer?
Right. So Pocket Soccer was probably started around 2000.
Okay.
So most like R-Type was the first game that I shipped at Nintendo. And so that was just a conversion of the classic Game Boy R-Type. And we just upgraded it into a color version. So it came out really well. I mean, it's a great version of R-Type for...
Shut the door. Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
no problem. It's a great version of R-Type for a portable unit. I mean, it has all of the facets and features that you play in R-Type. So that was the first one, and then like I said, all of the other ones were concurrent, but obviously things like Warlock were having a little bit more complexity in some of the Disney games, just due to the process of working with Disney and making sure all of the artwork and everything was great.
Yeah.
That, those took a while as well.
All right. Yes. Yes, sir.
Was there any differences in like developing for like true Game Boy Color games that actually were specifically for the Game Boy Color as opposed to like the ones that worked on both systems? Or
So honestly, from my perspective, like there was only, I think R-Type was main, R-Type and maybe, I think R-Type was the only one I think that I can recall that was like, had that backwards compatible.
Fantastic port, by the way.
So Bits was a great developer. They already had created the Game Boy game. So like creating the colorized version was, they could almost do it in their sleep. So they just made the process easier. I think it was more difficult when we got to things like Crystallis, where we were like using half of we're using the NES code as kind of the base. And so the perspectives or maybe the colors of things could get kind of wonky, even though we were replacing the graphics, the framework was still based on that old NES game. So there was probably things that did get lost in translation, more so than things that were 100% built from the ground up, like a Warlock or even the Little Mermaid pinball.
So I had a question with Crystallis, real quick. So the Game Boy Color was very capable. Its color palette is one of the things a lot of people don't understand. It had a huge color palette versus Nintendo. Was the idea at the company when you're looking at this was like, hey, we can make this look a lot better and colorful on the Game Boy Color, so people aren't gonna care about it being a one-to-one port, it's gonna be better.
Exactly. So that was kind of the basic premise, and obviously in retrospect, maybe you could debate some of those things. But yeah, our goal was to try to quote improve the localization, and you could debate whether that worked. Some people kind of like the old school way in which some of the stilted way and some of like the old games were localized. I think it did give it a more unique flavor, whereas when you're rewriting something, you're taking everything into consideration. You're trying to fill a plot hole or something that maybe didn't need to be filled. So yes, so the color palette maybe looked, for lack of a little better term, might have looked a little bit more garish, but that was because, you know what, we've got more colors, damn it, we're gonna put more colors into this thing. So sometimes when you're doing these things, they do end up being a little overproduced, for better or for worse. But of course, you've got the colors, you might as well use them.
Favorite Lynx game of yours? Or
I would say Lemmings. I think, like, I played it on the Amiga before I got to Atari, and like everybody, just thought it was an awesome game. And actually, the folks that did some of the original programming on the Amiga version did everything on the Lynx version as well. So it was like super duper authentic, and mainly we just kind of helped them convert it in terms of the, you know, the aspect ratios and resolution and trying to get the controls to feel right on something that probably had no business being on. You know, like it's not like there's no Lynx mouse or anything. Like this little D-pad here may or may not be the best way to control that type of game. So we tried to make it as intuitive and user-friendly as we could, and to their credit, the developers were willing to put up with it and, you know, make the, I would call it the best portable version of Lemmings out there.
What was, real quick to tie into Lemmings, did that game in particular, because of the very small characters, when did that become like the resolution of the links, which was definitely a challenge? When did that make that difficult to determine whether a game could be on the system or not?
Unfortunately, those types of details aren't always taken into consideration. My guess is somebody came and said, oh, Lynx has sold 5 million copies or whatever Lynx sold, and then the upper manager will go, sounds like a great idea. If we can only do 10% of that 5 million, it's gonna make us some money. So generally, sometimes decisions like that have no bearing, no correlation to actually the execution of how you're gonna do it, because that's gonna be somebody else's problem. So like somebody makes a deal, like, and just, I mean, probably the best example of that type of thing is this Disney deal.
Okay.
Of which I'm not sure how much of it I can say. But anybody that's a Nintendo fan know that Nintendo made those little playing cards back in the day.
Yeah.
So the first hit was Mickey Mouse. So upon the anniversary of either Disney's, I think Disney's relationship with Nintendo on making those cards, I think it was probably Mr. Yamuchi was like, you know what, it'd be a great idea if we could bring Mickey Mouse to the N64 and to the GameCube. And so that deal was made somewhere, somehow, someway. And the minimum, so basically if you have a licensed game, there's a minimum guarantee. So say you wanna make Shrek. So DreamWorks is like, sure, well, you guys can make a Shrek game, but we want a minimum guarantee of $1 million. So generally you have to budget and give them some percentage of that guarantee upfront to start the process of the game. But like, I don't know, it's been a long time, but the minimum guarantee on this Disney Mickey Mouse thing was like, maybe $100 million? I don't know.
Wow.
It was the type of deal that you don't know how it was made. And then the deal was done, and then you get called into somebody's office, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we want to put you in charge of doing Mickey Mouse on like the N64." But then the 64 was going out, so it's like then it shifted to GameCube. And Disney and Japan had done it. We're trying to rope Rare into this, and Rare took out their 10-foot pole. They're like, "We're measuring it," and stood like 11 feet back. And like somebody somehow coerced them into making a racing game, which I'm sure they just like used the Diddy Kong engine, slapped Diddy on, and like called it a day. But they wanted to do like a Donkey Kong Country style Mickey Mouse game. Like that's what Disney wanted. Rare was like, nope. And thus there was this huge back and forth. And I'm here just like producer, just sitting in the middle, just trying to, you know, stay out of the line of fire. And eventually, somehow they talked Capcom into doing it, and Rare got their way, and then Rare just went on about their business. And then I was just literally saddled with all these great sounding titles, but Little Mermaid, but it was Little Mermaid 2, the direct-to-video version of Little Mermaid, not the original Little Mermaid. And so we had like a list of like a dozen of these games, which we had to try to figure out, hey, how to keep them up to Nintendo standards of quality, how to satisfy the terms of the contract, how to make money at it, and how to get it out the door per the terms of the contract. So it was an interesting, as I call it, juggling flaming chainsaws kind of thing. Like, Was a pinball game the best execution of Little Mermaid 2? It was a good pinball game, but was there any good execution of Little Mermaid 2? I'm not sure that like a generic platformer would have benefited the world either. Alice in Wonderland platformer was done by Digital Eclipse. They did a pretty good job at that. But the whole thing was just one of these things where upper management made this huge decision that everybody else had to kind of build the plane while you're flying.
That's really interesting. Yes?
So are there any, like you were talking earlier about games that kind of cross platforms because they're developed so late in the process?
Right.
Did you run into any games where that ended up happening, where you were working on one system and then it transitioned to the next?
I think probably at Atari, the most significant one would have been like Alien versus Predator. However, back to like the deal that I was talking to before, many times like Raiden, they would make the deal and then either to amortize the costs or to squeeze out another game somehow, they would make the Lynx version and then make the Jaguar version. Sometimes the developer would try to two-for it. So if the developer overextended themselves on one game, so say the budget was $100K to do the Game Boy game, or the Lynx game, for example, they would then come back with hat in hand saying, oh yeah, we need more money, blah, 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 sky's falling. And then we go like, oh, you know what? Maybe you guys can do the Jaguar game too. Here's a contract for $250,000 to do the Jaguar version. So things like that would kind of happen all the time, where you would create another SKU or a game to keep the developer afloat. Hopefully everything comes out great and you get two games and they both sell well and everybody's happy and the world is none the wiser. Less of that happened at Nintendo, but you did see things like Eternal Darkness going from a N64 game to a GameCube game, or Conquer going from like a cute cuddly thing to something really raunchy. So if you have, like, those are cases where like Nintendo has the budget to make the best decision possible and have the team empowered enough to make the best games possible. So whereas at Atari, it was usually as a bridge to keep the developer afloat and hope that everything would come out great at the end. It's kind of six in one hand, half a dozen on the other. But back in those days of video game development, those were the types of things that tended to happen all the time, because everybody would under budget and over spec.
All right, I have to ask, unless you're very good. So, worst project, worst nightmare.
So realistically, I would say some 30 years later, really would have probably been the Brett Hull hockey, Charles Barkley basketball. Like, those are probably my second or third things I would be working on as a producer. So another thing that was always jarring working with external developers was, so the milestones would be set in a certain fashion. You try to honestly, you'd want to weight the dollars towards the end of the project for obvious reasons. But sometimes that didn't happen for one reason or other because they still had to staff up. But it's never a good sign when you go to a developer and they've got like a brand new Series 6 BMW that they didn't have the last time before they signed the contract. So Ringler was running behind, we went to theirs, and it was a heated discussion. Literally the words were, do you want to step outside and resolve this outside in the street?
Oh, wow.
And things clearly just went downhill from there. And at some point, I think the contracts were terminated. At some point, whatever source code was there was somehow stitched together by somebody, I don't know, and released into the ether.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was there's a lot of stuff, people can get pretty heated conversations, but that was probably the worst, only because of the egregious mismanagement of the funds. If you're gonna buy the car, don't, park it down the street and visit, developers would do stuff like that all the time, but usually, if they knew you were visiting, they'd at least hire, the crisis actors to show up in the office and pretend to work, Then you're like, oh wow, people are working.
That's crazy.
Yeah, these are only minor exaggerations, trying to protect the innocent.
Well, I mean, in Brett Hull, it wasn't released. So obviously there's some problems there and
Okay, well, so I got some other stuff I can kind of go through. Unfortunately, you can't put a video in a PDF file. So yeah, let's see. Quickly go through. So these are some of the classic Nintendo ads. I think the 90s were kind of like a peak time for print ads. So yeah, my Game Boy Bionic Commando ad, I don't know if you can see it. And then just the basic tenor and tone of all of those ads from that period were great. We didn't really have much say. So that was back in the day when product and marketing were siloed. So we would just give them like a breakdown of the game, a video, some pictures, and they'd just come up with their own little thing. But it would have been nice for a little bit more interplay. But those ads during that period, all those were pretty classic ads.
Would there be a time when pretty much the programmer or the producer of the game, when it went to marketing or advertising and they saw what they were doing, would there be any type of avenue if they had an issue with how it was marketed, or was like, too bad, so sad, hey, we're
Yes,
marketing
so
it?
you'd scream and unfortunately, I think it was that way, that they did not bring the two parties together. So always as the product development team, we would always kind of feel weird and slighted by the marketing because they didn't care, they didn't understand the game, blah, blah, blah. But it was just how the management was set up. They didn't make it so that everybody was working towards the same goal. For better or worse, I think mobile, and maybe on the worst side, mobile games now interject the product and the marketing all kind of together, and that's why you have all these like horrible mobile ads. But at least they're trying to operate as one unit to make the product a success. So maybe that's the good part. So after Nintendo, I think I had a few more stints in the video game industry, but then I ended up in the toy industry and kind of continued through the tradition of working on mobile and handheld games at MGA. So back in the day, and I don't know all of the details of the story, MGA actually was a distributor for Game & Watch or something. So MGA had a legacy of making these really horrible LCD games. So I think this is one of the good ones that we worked on. We're trying to get Galaga, but they stiffed us with Galaxian. I don't know if that was so on another political tangent. So I don't know all of the politics involved in Ms. Pac-Man, but clearly there's beef between all the parties that own some part of Ms. Pac-Man.
Yeah.
At some point, nobody really cared, and MGA was able to release Ms. Pac-Man. We wanted to do another version of Ms. Pac-Man. Namco was like, nah, I can't do it. So we're like begging them. They're like, oh, can we have Galaga? We're like, no, sorry. Galaxian. Oh, sure. Yeah, go for it. You can have Galaxian. Like, it's just one of these weird political things. So we made a really good version of Galaxian, but this was kind of towards the tail end of this cycle of product. And we probably made like 20 or 30,000. I've never seen this in a store. I believe they were shipped someplace. Have you ever seen it? Exactly. So this was our, before that, we were trying to like bring back that old school Coleco, but we did it before there was nostalgia for that type of thing. So in general, the people that would buy stuff like this, we called them shut up toys. So we had to make them for like, all of the components couldn't cost more than like $2 and change, because they had to sell for like 10 or 12 bucks at Walmart. It was like the kids crying in the store, and you just toss this in their hand, and you end up in the checkout aisle, they already have it, and the kid's quiet, hence a shut-up toy, or some piece of crap that your grandma's gonna buy you. You're like, I wanted a real Game Boy, I didn't want, we're continuing, after Hasbro and Tiger kind of moved on, we're still continuing the legacy of like random crappy LCD games. They're interesting, they're kind of fun to make, it's like a puzzle, because all of the artwork is actually embedded in the LCD screen, and then the chip turns the lights on and off to simulate motion and shooting of the ships. But granted, we probably sold hundreds of thousands, if not millions of these. So for a while, they were a good bread and butter item. And then of course, we're always trying to push the envelope. So we did do the first Texas Hold'em game. So right when Texas Hold'em was like peaking, Walmart was like, hey, you know what, if you guys, this was being like in early to midsummer. Walmart was like, you know what? If you guys can get us a Texas Hold'em game by Christmas, we'll order 1 million pieces. And this is another game where like the president of the company's like, here, you know Texas Hold'em? Like, I've heard of it. Oh, here, okay, it's all you. But we need it to be landed in America by like October. And here's your ticket to China. So not, I don't think I'd ever played, I probably played like poker like 5 times, never played any Hold'em. So I was like reading through the book, going on a plane to China, literally like locked in a room with the programmer, as we're trying to teach a Chinese programmer how to play Texas Hold'em in like 8 hours. Because he had like 3 days to program it. Like, so we took a 8-card stud game and like hacked it into Texas Hold'em.
Nice.
Just to get it done. We made it, and then I think Radica or somebody else came out with like a good version, and then like, so we got like our $1 million or 1 million sales in, and then our slice of the pie was shrinking because people were spending. And that's like the ugly reality of like the toy market. Like, it's
Attack of the
ruthless.
clones.
Huh?
Attack of the clones.
Yeah, exactly. So everybody began to clone it, and we just, we tried to innovate. So we did some of the Shrek games. The Shrek games actually have actual dot matrix displays, so these were pretty good. But it was, I guess, Shrek 3 might not have been the most loved Shrek. And so, unfortunately, felt like these were big hits. And then we did a lot of games for girls. So obviously MGA was kind of the owner of the Bratz license. And there was a time, you're familiar with Skylanders?
Yeah.
So like we pioneered this whole like toys to games or games to life, or whatever they call it, with this thing called Mugies. And I talked about something that was ridiculous. This is probably the most like ridiculously over-spec game ever made. So it's got like an LCD screen, it's got like a faux touch screen, so if you like punch the screen, it does something. I think there's like an accelerometer in it. You can, it's like a little Tamagotchi thing, you can feed the little doll creature on screen, and then when you do that, there's a USB plug, you plug it in your computer, and at the time, it would take you to a fully pseudo-realized MMO world.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and this was done in like 6 months or something completely ridiculous.
That's so cool.
Because, right, yeah, but again, it was like over-spec for like an 8-year-old.
How is there not like a counterculture like bronies about this?
Because it just never, like, so somebody stole the source code or something, so there's like a weird bootleg version that still floats around. And we sold, and this is the type of stuff that like we would force through the channel. So like the owner of the company thought it was a good idea. I mean, we kind of liked it, but like still, it was done under really rushed circumstances. So if you wanted your allocation of the Bratz dolls, you probably had to take a few of these as well. So, and then once that machine got running, then the owner would like say, oh, just make another $100,000 to drop, 100,000 pieces to drop the price of the cost of goods by like 3 cents, you know? And so, while it was forced to the channel, they did do advertising. They just never marketed and nurtured it to make it a success. That being said, all the toy companies, like when I was at MG, I think we had like 3 MMOs during the time I was there.
That's so cool.
This was before MMOs were even popular. This was like 2007.
Like with a different
Crazy.
branding, that sounds fun. Like you.
Oh no, it had different branding. So this is the girly branding.
Yeah.
We had the boys branding where you could play like fire creatures and stone creatures. And then we had the gender neutral branding called Paws where you could be like a cat or a dog.
That's so cool.
No, it's insane. Like no, it's cool, but it was insane because all 3 of these were done concurrently in like 6 months. Plus the MMO.
Honestly, that sounds fun. Like
Yeah.
for me, that I don't know. It's like
No,
that sounds like
it's
it'd
not
be
like
fun
there
to
wasn't
play with.
something there, but it was just so like balls to the wall and going so fast that nobody thought whether we should. You know? We just did it. And so, like I said, it's a minor cult success. It's one of these weird footnotes. And yeah, it would have been great if it became like the next World of Warcraft.
Oh, I had one of those pens.
Yeah, so we did a lot of those like pins, and we had, every time we had to sell a new product to Walmart, we'd have to change the case. So you could see like, we had the card version, and then we had like the diabetes pill version, or whatever you wanna call it. And then we had like a knockoff of Brain Age called XO Brain Test. And if anybody can explain to me what that means, like, I don't know. So yeah, we would try to ride every fad, but like all the schedules were like, product development, all these things were like literally months to weeks. But it was like an exciting ride.
Any questions about that? Of these, what was your favorite to work on? Like of your.
You know, I like the Shrek ones. I like Huge. I think they're all fun. We also had another one. This is like this is a thing that we actually made to prototype. So this was like meant to be kind of like a Flash player Game Boy. So you could take the Flash games off the internet and like download them to this little portable device and play like, I don't know, some Armor games and things like that all the time. But like, it was another thing where this cost like $12 and needed to cost 10, you know? And like, you're so close, but so far, and because nobody was gonna take a risk on it, it had to be, like, if it was like a $30 item, people would have bought it. They would have taken the risk. But at 50, 60 bucks, people were like, I don't know.
Imagine a handheld where you could play like Happy Wheels or
So
something.
never came out.
Never
That'd
came
be
out. This
so
is the only one.
Oh, so
Yeah,
cool.
this is the only prototype. You got a question?
Yeah.
Huh.
Was that inspired by the Game Boy Micro? Like the Game Boy Advance Micro?
Possibly. So in general, there's a factory. So sometimes we're able to like have our own artists. And we're like, oh yeah, make it look like a Game Boy Color, blah, blah, blah. And then we would send all that reference, and then if we thought we could do it cheaper in China, we would send the same reference to China, and then they would come back with something else, and then whatever was cheapest is what we would end up using. So generally, obviously, Game Boys, PSPs, or whatever, all those were kind of used as reference for creating most of these things, because that was a reference that like the buyer would use. That was like the common language between the retail buyer, like Walmart, and the people in China could all understand that. And they would say, change it so that we don't get sued. So on this one, oddly enough, speaking of lawsuits, so this one was called Fit It. And so this was like another one to appeal to girl gamers. So basically we took a pre-existing, might be Tetris game, but we changed all of the graphics to like lipstick and lips. But we still got like a cease and desist order. So then we had to redo it, and then we just ripped off columns. But for whatever reason, Sega didn't give a rip. So like there's two versions of this floating around. I don't know which version of this. One that is a knockoff of Tetris, and one that is a knockoff of columns. The Tetris one, we had to change because we didn't want to get sued.
That's so cool.
That's awesome.
That game Go is pretty cool. I would have ate that up. 'Cause I
No,
play Flash games all the time.
Right, and that was the thing, because you could play, like, and now you have like the Roblox where you have all these rip-off games that all the kids love. Like, there
Now
are
you
certain
have
things that are
mobile
just,
games,
Huh?
but now you have mobile games. But like
Yeah.
I played on Newgrounds
Yeah, right.
all the time.
Right.
Like I played every game on that
Yeah.
site the
Early
day.
2000s?
Yeah.
What time did the game go? Do you know what
This
year?
was probably 2007 or
Yep.
8. So, like, it was right before the App Store, so I don't know if I have the picture. Yeah. So you can see down there, we had mocked up our own faux little App Store. So, like, we would try to, like, maybe go to Cartoon Network and, like, reskin whatever games were on Cartoon Network, or just license, like, Teen Titans Go or whatever,
Oh my
to
god.
some other pre-existing Flash game, and just have, like, and it could play video MP3 player. I mean, so there's all these chip vendors, like ARM. You guys are familiar with
Yeah.
ARM, where they just sell the specification to the chip. And generally, most of their business is done with like these Taiwanese, not TSMC, but I'm sure TSMC as well. These kind of low budget, like clock radio, speaker kind of chip vendors. And they always have to sell like a new chip. So they'll license something from ARM, reconfigure it into their own specifications, and then they'll go to the toy companies or like the low-end electronic companies that try to sell these chips. And some of them, they're always like few steps under spec of what the current technology would be. So this chip, if you took away the flash, would probably be like one notch under a Game Boy Advance or something. So you had all the programmers that were that could not really do 3D, but still could do these old school chips. So we would have some of those guys make some of these games for us as well, because they knew how to do that really well. So we had a whole plug and play department. We make these things. So yeah, we're just making kind of these kind of funky, crappy video games in like months. Like we'd have a line list of like 100 SKUs that would get whittled down to like 30 and have 2 weeks to make them. It was fun, but like it probably messes with your head because you're doing way too much and like you can't go back to like a normal product development.
That's nuts.
Yeah, it was nuts. And then virtual pets, we created a whole bunch of these Tamagotchi knockoffs as well. So I think before Tamagotchi did it, we also had infrared, so you could like transfer snacks and treats between your friends. The problem with any of this stuff is like, even though these were cheap, the chance of somebody else having another one, be it a Lynx or like this $10 Tamagotchi, is like slim to none. That's the unfortunate part. Like we were super excited about it, but realistically, did anybody ever use it? Unfortunately.
That's fascinating. What was the last project, toy-wise, or like with this?
It was probably Shrek. I don't know, like it all kind of blurs together. And again, the Shrek ones were pretty good. We made one for like Donkey, Fiona, Shrek. And like you could, I don't know if you can see it from here, but they all have like the ears, the little Shrek ears coming out. So like by the time, like we started with like things like is the asteroids? Yeah, like the asteroids one, which were pretty rudimentary. And then we worked up to like actually more sophisticated games and more sophisticated gameplay. But at that point you had mobile, you had the DS coming out. So, and then obviously it hikes up the price point of these things, maybe like $1 or $2 more. So like the popularity of those also unfortunately declined, you know.
They're no longer shut up toys.
Did Tiger, was Tiger around anymore during that time?
I think they've been reabsorbed into Hasbro, and like they had, like Jax was probably our main competitor. And so a lot of this came down to, like, during that era, you had the video game buyer who was doing pretty good business. But then you had like the standard toy buyer that saw some of their business going away to their game buyer. So they wanted stuff like this to compete on their shelves internally against the game buyer. So they would be willing to support some of this stuff to some extent. Like that's why, I mean, because the Jax plug and play games were pretty popular. A few iterations of our dance mats did pretty well. But then you had stuff like the Hyperscan. I don't know if anybody's
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Remembers a Hyperscan?
So you had people like trying, again, should it exist? Like, is making a video game based on playing trading cards, should it exist? I don't know, but somebody thought that would be a great implementation. Doesn't have cartridges. Hey, the cards are only like $3. There's all these like pseudo-justified reasons for it, but then, you know, it's kind of like a running joke, you know?
Yeah.
Throw it
And
against
it's
the wall and see
unfortunate.
what sticks.
Huh?
Throw it against the wall and see what sticks.
I think it's some of that, but like a lot of it was trying to find clever implementation for things that looked high tech and might have been kind of at the time, and kind of shoehorning it into something that looked magical so that you could run a TV ad on it and hope that kids would buy it. But obviously, the keep it simple, stupid executions like the Jax plug and play for Pac-Man, Ms. Pac-Man. I mean, the Ms. Pac-Man with the little twisty ball joystick, that was great. That was like the perfect nostalgia. Everything worked on it, worked the way it should, and that was a great execution.
Sold at a toy store,
Right.
but it was a game, because games were being more popular and taking over the toy market, so like it was a twofer, right?
Right, it was a win-win for everybody, but then everybody you have the knockoffs and people trying to get greedy, and that does kind of make it difficult. And people like I call it ghetto tech, those little things like the Hyperscans and the Bucci's where you're just trying to like cram as much technology into like a 39-cent chip. It's fun, but it is a little, in retrospect, you could argue it's a little gratuitous. But you do need to attract people's attention, because when the buyers would come through, it would be like a showroom. And everybody would have to do their little tap dance to get the buyer. It would have to be pick me. So there's a little bit of give and take on all those different avenues to try to make your $3 piece of junk, you know, seem like a diamond. You know?
it's pretty cool. actually.
Any yes,
It's
sir.
really cool.
How do you think the market is now? It's like you said before, so many kids are on Roblox or on an iPhone or some other platform and they're playing more games that way versus, there's not Toys R Us anymore for them to be exploring these kinds of things.
Exactly. So you had the loss of Toys R Us, you had mobile. I think people are all, the exciting thing about the toy industry is that everybody's trying to do something cool and unique. That's also part of the gimmick. I mean, as funny as the Hyperscan was, people were trying to make cool new things. People weren't really trying to make the intent wasn't always to make something junky, it was to try to make something interesting and captivating. But I think that kids are probably more entrenched to Roblox, and now you have adults that are more into nostalgia and figures and things, and the electronic items. Those I think are the things those things in the middle, those are the things I think that are kind of going by the wayside. A few years ago we tried, let me see, I have a picture. So a few years ago we tried to resuscitate TV games. So we actually have, this is actually a Nintendo emulator that can be played on HDMI as well as output to an LCD screen.
Wow.
So we sold it to this dude, but he didn't want to pay the extra 5 cents royalty for the HDMI. But nobody did, it wasn't just him. He's not with us today, but he's another infamous character in the world of video games. But it's easy to mock, but the margins on physical goods are so thin that it made it difficult for that transition from older technology to new, just because of the royalties and the few cents. And that's why you might see a regurgitation of a Furby or a Tamagotchi, and occasionally somebody will do something like Beast Lab or the little wizard thing where you had the wand and it would smoke and you'd have the reveal, you have the reveal toys. But that's really the only kind of technical innovation I think you see in the toy aisle these days for the most part.
All right, we're about 5 more minutes. Any other questions, or this has been really insightful. I feel like I walk away, and what I love about this discussion is I walk away with knowing so much more of how crazy handheld gaming is and the toy industry, and I really appreciate you spending your time and sharing this.
Oh yeah, no problem. Like I said, I hope everybody enjoyed it. Both the video, things are probably now a little bit more calm, especially in the video game industry. But in the 90s I don't think it was as crazy as Nolan Bushnell hot tub parties in the 70s and 80s. But the 90s were more did you ever see, was that movie Grandma's Boy?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, Grandma's Boy was bordered on documentary. So you had people that were super young, immature, had some power, and were just could do crazy stuff, and nobody cared. Because the people that were just 5 or 10 years older also wanted to indulge in the same bad behavior. And so the negative things you may or may not hear about the video game industry, there's probably truth to that. And there's, a lot of funny stuff and a lot of not so good stuff, but it was definitely Wild West, and the budgets were low. So if you're making a game for 200, 500, maybe even $1 million, and it sold 1 million pieces, well then everybody's happy. So everybody will look past any of the negative parts, because you were, as the cliche goes, printing money, and people were happy. Now the budgets are higher, so it's less, for lack of a better term, I'll put that in quotes, fun.
Well, in the 90s, you also didn't have the smartphone industry. So you had to have a little, now you can hand an iPad to a kid and that'll shut them up. You needed the handhelds back then.
Exactly. So that's why that was part of the fun. That's why I say retailers would definitely indulge a lot of this stuff, because there wasn't the smartphones, and they definitely needed something. People just needed something to compete against the DSs and the Game Boys and things like that.
Anybody else? Wrap it up. One more question. Yeah.
Sorry, I know I missed most of this, but
No problem.
I'm thrilled to hear about the links in particular. I mean,
Okay.
a partner who has at least one of them we're trying to repair, and I was hoping to get some ideas on like, was there an intent to resurrect anything else Atari other than just, you know, the plug and play, like $20 collection console type things that you just mentioned of the.
I think in general, not knowing enough about Atari's plans now, but like if you have the Atari 50, it does have like both the Jaguar and Lynx emulators. And seeing that they still own that intellectual property, it is possible that they release a 7800 that maybe they'll keep going up the line. So at one point during the previous Atari management, so when we were working on this little HDMI NES emulator, we're like, oh, maybe we could do other platforms. So I had tried to like hit up the previous management, oh, maybe we could do a Jaguar thing, but we never had like enough traction to like get enough juice to where that could come to fruition. But the new Atari does seem to have some resources. They're releasing new games, new-ish hardware. So I think it's possible. I don't know if they're gonna be as ballsy enough to like just release a whole new hardware platform. I assume that they'll just try to like refresh what they own the intellectual property to.
I think the challenge is without not knowing, and first of all, I don't know what they're gonna be doing, this is just me, I work a lot with Atari, all I can say is that, I think sales numbers matter, and like, what's a feasible product, and what does a feasible product match our audience of what they want, and so, I know that, you know, definitely I think there's interest about offering additional Atari IP, especially hardware, that doesn't make sense in the market. And you know, a 2600 plus is like a slam dunk because, you know, that sold millions of copies of consoles and it's out.
I just think of how many 2600s when you look at games from like 1990 something till today, how many 2600s, like 2600 is still like something that is viable in the actual physical retail market. There's people that are buying at least 10,000 units every year, if not more, since like the mid 90s. So they're kind of also a victim of their own success because the buyer's only gonna want more of what they sold and can sell. So it could be tricky for them to expand into different waters without carrying along with them the essence of the 2600 as well, from a marketing perspective.
And comparing it to like Sega, that's why you have so much Genesis classics, because that was their most popular product. Everything else after that was less successful. So like, that's the challenge I think companies, you get roped into like, we wanna sell something, you know, the hardcore collector wants the Lynx and the Jaguar. Does the general audience want that? And if we invest X amount of dollars into a product, are we gonna break even? You know, the 50 or the 500 or the 1,000 collectors who wanted it, where they were screaming online, will buy it, but will the mainstream buy it, which is gonna actually float the project and make it successful?
No, yeah.
Unfortunately.
Is that
There's
what we're
no.
looking at?
More or less, yeah, just any elaboration on the topic. I mean, like ever since they were doing the Atari Hotel, I was wondering like, they're trying something.
They're trying a lot of things, apparently. Like, hey, are you on the Atari like mailing list? Like this week we've got soccer jerseys, whiskey decanters this week. Oh hey, games! I heard you guys like games. Oh, we've got some games. The next week it'll be like
Neon lights.
neon lights, yeah.
I want that decanter.
We're gonna wrap this up, we're over time. I wanna thank everybody for coming here, and thank you so much. Let's give them a hand. Thank you so much to the video game industry and sharing your stories. It is most appreciated.
Oh, thank you. Thanks everybody that came by to hear me ramble on about the old days of
Yeah.
making handheld games.
That's so cool.